Welcome to Funeral Service Anatomy 103. I'm Dr. Clayton and I will be with you for this semester. These videos are just meant to be a tutorial, kind of a complimentary tool, kind of a one-on-one conversation to complement your lecture that's on Moodle. Now the lecture on Moodle is in PowerPoint and it has the information you need along with your textbook for each chapter. What I've found over the past couple of years is that students benefit from a little bit more in-depth conversation about specific parts of each chapter. So I won't be starting from beginning to end of each chapter. This is just to highlight and to complement what you are already doing. Before we get started in information for this first chapter, I want to help you with a few tools for success for this semester. You are about to embark on an anatomy journey, and I wouldn't take it lightly. This course is hard. It's hard because it's a lot of information. It's a large volume of information in a short amount of time. Also, it's based off of Latin, a completely different language than most of you are probably familiar with. The nice thing is a lot of our language has a root in Latin, so some of these terms you've heard before and you'll be familiar with. But over these next first few weeks, first, second, third week, we want to help you get acquainted with the terminology to help you be successful for the whole semester. So here are a few tips that will help you be successful in this course this semester. First of all, when you are studying, read for understanding. All of us have been guilty of this, where we're reading something and before you know it, you're thinking about your grocery list or you're thinking about, what am I going to eat tonight? And you've gone through an entire page and you have no clue what you just read. So when you read your textbook, don't just read 3-4 pages and go, well, I don't understand it. You may need to read one paragraph and dig into it. That brings me to the second part of reading for understanding, but also learning how to take notes and organize information. Most of you have taken notes your whole life. You've gone through school, you're here now, and it's just more of the same. But when you come into a course that has so much information with different content than you are familiar with, you have to learn how to make that content make sense to you. Here's an example. We'll use this again later, but to help you organize information. When I'm looking at different types of muscle tissue, there are 3 types of muscle tissue. First one is skeletal muscle, the second one is smooth muscle, and then the third one is cardiac muscle. So if you look at my notes here, this is really what it would look like when I'm taking notes off of my textbook. I start with organizing what they are. 3 different types of muscle. This seems super simple, but some of you won't do this, and all this information will just get jumbled up and confused. What we know is that if we use all of our senses in studying, things stick with us longer. So not only do I want to read, but I want to color code things so that they stick in my brain in an organized fashion. So I will literally put it in different colors. Skeletal muscle is in purple here. And then I just put simple bullet points that help me remember about the characteristics of skeletal muscle. And I may even make silly drawings, little doodles that will stick in my head. As I'm studying and I organize this information, I also will go through and use my other senses of saying it out loud, auditory, so that I can hear. That's another sense. Not only visually do I see it in different color, but auditorily I'm hearing it. Even when I'm studying the bones, I will start on my body and start tactile, actually touching and feeling where these bones are, because it will help stick in my mind. So we've talked about reading for understanding, organizing your information, using your different senses. Here's another thing, start early. I am the queen of procrastinating. I feel like I do better under pressure, but that's a falsehood with anatomy. You may retain it for a little bit to take the test the next day. This course is comprehensive. What we learn in week 1, you are responsible for in your final. We know that repetition is the key to adult learning. The more you repeat it, the more it's going to stick. So use your senses and repeat it often, and it will stick with you. The last thing that I just want to encourage you on would be repetition. See how I did that? I repeated it again. It's important for you to continue to go over this over and over again. That's what will help it stick. So these are your tips for success in this course. It's up to you whether or not you use them. But they've been pretty tried and true and tested from previous years of students going through this and my own experience of going through this. And I had to learn it the hard way, so I'm trying to give it to you on a silver platter first weekend. Let's dive into content for this first week. This first week is anatomical terminology, medical terminology. It's the new language that you're going to use in this course for the rest of the semester and as you move forward in your other courses. The very first thing we need to start with is anatomical position. Now, a lot of you have seen that picture, the famous picture Leonardo da Vinci did of the gentleman just standing there completely nude, right? Arms down by his side, feet shoulder width apart, and his palms are facing forward. This is anatomical position, and this is what we will be using as kind of our base whenever we talk about the human body. One thing that's important for you to remember, when we are talking about the human body, it's not your right and left. It's based off of the body, the person. So when we talk about the right hand, it is the person's right hand. While you are watching this video right now, my right hand is on your left side. This is something you're going to have to retrain your brain when you talk about the human body. It is now based off of the person's body that you are talking about. It's no longer your orientation, but theirs. Let's start with some basic terms. From anatomical position, anytime you're talking about something that's above, we call that superior. Anything that's below, we call inferior. But it can be just in relating one structure to another. So simply, my knee is inferior to my chin. I could also say my chin is inferior to my nose. It's all just based off of location from one to the other. Another pair of terms is proximal and distal. Now, when we look at the human body, we tend to think head, trunk, and then you have arms and legs, what we call extremities. Proximal and distal is a term we usually use for our extremities. And it means proximal is closer towards the trunk, distal, further distance away from the trunk. So my foot is distal to my knee. And once again, as you're learning these terms, don't just memorize the term, make it make sense to you. Start using that terminology and even feeling, okay, my knee, what would that be in relation to my ankle? Oh, okay, so my knee is more proximal than my ankle, but my ankle is more distal than my knee. So start using the terms. It will help you in that. A basic starting point for anatomical position, anterior and posterior. Anterior refers to anything on the front half of the body. Posterior refers to anything on the back half of the body. Medial and lateral. If you were to draw a line down the middle of your body, anything that's closest to the middle, we call it medial, towards the midline, medial. Anything that's out to the side, we call lateral. So just very basically, if you think about your ear and your nose, what would you say about your ear in relation to your nose? Think about it for a minute. Your ear is lateral to your nose. What's your nose in relation to your ear? The nose is medial to your ear, right? Now, is this my right ear or left ear? Right ear. Remember, it's based off of the body. All those things you want to keep retraining your brain. These are new terms for you to learn. Peripheral and central. Peripheral. When you think about peripheral vision, what does that mean? Periphery. Peripheral means on the outside. So peripheral tends to be towards the outside. Central is towards the middle. It kind of reminds you of proximal and distal or medial and lateral, similar in terms. The last pair I want to go through with you is superficial and deep. I think the easiest way to think of this is a cut on the skin. If you just scratch your skin, and it's not bleeding, it's a superficial scratch. It's towards the surface. But if you gash yourself with a kitchen knife when you're in the kitchen, and it goes through a scratch, into bleeding, through muscle, into bone, it's much deeper, right? So there's deep and superficial, and that deals with from bone to surface of the skin. Those are pairs of terms that we like to use. Anterior and posterior, superior and inferior, proximal and distal, medial and lateral, peripheral and central, superficial and deep. Moving on to planes of the body. When we're looking at the body, the human body is a 3D image. Some of you remember from trigonometry that X, Y, and Z plane, right? There were three-dimensional figures. So when we think of planes of the body, again, anatomical position, palms facing forward. If I were to take a buzzsaw and slice straight down my body, straight down, and I have a front half and a back half, we would call that plane the frontal plane. Another term is coronal plane. So frontal or coronal plane, when it gives you an anterior and a posterior. The next plane is a sagittal plane. You take that same saw, buzzsaw straight down the middle, and I have a right side and a left side. That's called the sagittal plane. Now you can make a cut straight down the middle, and we call that a mid-sagittal plane. Any other section that's off the center would be a parasagittal plane. So when I have a right and a left, that's sagittal plane. When I have a front and a back, that's frontal plane. That gives me an anterior and posterior. The last plane is the transverse plane. If you were to take a buzzsaw, cut me right through the middle, and I have a top half and a bottom half, or a superior half and an inferior half, that is a transverse plane, a transverse section. You could cut through the middle of the waist. You could cut through the head in order to see some of the ventricles of the brain. You could cut mid-thigh. It doesn't matter where along there, but if it's a superior and inferior cut from anatomical position, then it's a transverse plane. Some of you, this might confuse you. Well, what if the body's lying down? True, but in orientation to that body, if you cut through the middle of the thigh, that's still a transverse cut, no matter what position that body's laying in, because we're talking from anatomical position. So those are our three planes: frontal plane, sagittal plane, and transverse plane. Major divisions of the body. I'm going to scoot my skeleton over here and show you guys some basic regions of the body that we refer to. Got our skeleton here. Some of these seem very straightforward and easy. Good. Take the easy stuff where you get it, right? So when we talk about basic regions of the body, first one is the head. The head refers to both the skull that we talk about, the cranium that houses the brain, and the facial bones of the skull. So cranium is going to be facial and cranium, skull, head, the whole area. Cervical is the neck. Then when we talk about the trunk actually has three components to it. Your thorax, which is your chest, abdomen, and pelvis. All of those would be trunk when we refer to the term trunk. And then we have extremities. We just mentioned that. Extremities are going to be upper extremities for your arms and lower extremities for your legs. So those are basic regions of the body when we're talking about that. When we look at the abdomen, there are two different ways to divide the abdomen up. One is in 9 different regions. And really it just looks like you take a tic-tac-toe board on the abdomen, and it helps you with orienting where certain structures might be found. Your textbook is a great resource. Use the figures in the back. They're in full color. Page 108 shows you those 9 little regions. For me, I love the most simple, straightforward quadrants, where you literally just kind of put a T across midline of the body, and you have an upper right quadrant. Remember, it's based off of the person's body, not yours. So this is their right upper quadrant. Left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant. Some of you have heard some of those terms and, oh, I've got pain in the right lower quadrant, must be my appendix, right? So some of those things will be more familiar for you when we talk about abdominal quadrants. That's a little bit easier to go through. Body cavities. Cavities are just, think of them as like a cave, a cavernous area, and something's housed inside of that. So when we look at the thoracic cavity, you have this rib cage that kind of creates this big cave for things to be in. And within that thoracic cavity, we have pleural cavities, pericardial cavities, and then mediastinal cavities. The pleural cavity houses the lungs. The pericardial cavity houses the heart. And the mediastinal is really kind of behind the heart, but between the lungs, right down the middle. And that's going to be where your esophagus, some of the digestive tract runs. Abdominopelvic cavity, you have abdominal cavity, pelvic, and then peritoneal cavity. Abdominal cavity is where you really think of housing our digestive organs like your small intestines, large intestines, stomach, liver. The pelvic cavity is much lower, actually in the pelvis here. And that's when you think of reproductive organs in there. And then the last part is the peritoneal cavity, which really refers to this area that houses both of the abdominal and pelvic cavities. And there's this thin layer of membranous tissue that goes across the entire abdomen through there. When we look at terms in your book, page 9, table A, if you want to pause this video and get this out, we're going to go through this list top to bottom just to make sure you understand this terminology. What's nice is that as you learn this terminology and we move forward, we said this is foundational building blocks for the rest of the semester. So these first few weeks, we're going to focus on this. Because as we get into blood vessels, you think with embalming, you need to know your blood vessels. As we move into blood vessels, they are named for where they are located. So if you know that term for the area, you can guess what the blood vessel is. You don't even have to memorize it, you just know. So we look at blood vessels running through the arm. The armpit area is considered axillary, and your upper arm is considered brachial. So guess what? If you have a blood vessel running through your armpit, it's a big artery running through there, guess what it might be named? Axillary artery. Now, if you continue that same blood vessel, but as it moves into this upper arm, it changes name from axillary artery to the brachial artery. So let's go through these terms starting top to bottom and help you familiarize yourself with them. Abdominal. We already touched on that, so hopefully that already starts clicking in your brain. Now, abdominal does not refer to the whole trunk, right? It really refers to this area below the thorax, but above the pelvis, thinking digestive organs in this area. Antecubital area. Anatomical position. Think about your elbow. It's that fleshy front anterior portion of your elbow. A lot of you have had your blood drawn there. You kind of think of that area, antecubital area. Axillary area, we just mentioned that. That's going to be your armpit. Brachial refers to the upper arm. It is not your entire arm. It is only the upper arm, the brachial portion up here. Buccal or oral. Buccal often refers to cheek, outside or inside, and oral being the mouth. So those can be interchangeable. Calf. Your calf is only the lower portion of your leg. So it's not this upper thigh. It's only the lower portion. It is not the anterior portion. It's only the posterior portion. That fleshy, meaty part of the back of your calf where your gastrocnemius muscle and soleus muscle are. Back of your calf there. So that's going to be your calf. Carpal. Carpal refers to your wrist. It's not your whole hand. It's just the wrist bones that connect the long bones of your forearm to these metacarpals here. Carpals. Another way to remember that, you think about when you drive your car, you have to hold with your hands, so carpals. When you look at the body, things are often mimicked or mirrored. It reminds you of another area in the body. Your wrist mimics what happens in your ankle. Just like in your arm and your leg, you have one long bone most proximal to the trunk. Two long bones as we go more distal, and then you have carpals in your wrist. You also have tarsals in your ankles as you move through. So carpal is wrist, tarsal is ankle. Cephalic refers to the head. Cervical refers to the neck. Cranial refers to the skull. Cutaneous refers to the skin. Digital refers to both fingers and toes. Facial refers to the face. Some of these seem pretty straightforward, terms you're familiar with. That's a good thing. Femoral or femoral is going to be the femur, this long bone of the thigh. So this only refers to the upper portion of your lower leg. Gluteal is the buttocks. A lot of you have heard the term glutes, right? Gluteal is buttock region. Groin or inguinal is the area where the thigh meets the trunk. So your trunk is going to be your thorax, abdomen, and pelvis, and then you have your thigh, which is the femoral region. So between the femur bone here and your pelvis, there's a line right here, and we call that inguinal or groin, kind of the crease in between there, inguinal or groin. That will be a major landmark as we move forward, so make sure you're familiar with that. Lumbar refers to the low back, but only in the area that's below the ribs and above the crest of the pelvis there. Pelvic, oh, sorry, I skipped on ahead, sorry. Nasal. Nasal refers to this bridge of your nose through there. It can also refer to the whole nose, but when we look at bones, the nose is cartilage beyond this bony portion that's right at the crest of your nose. Occipital is going to refer to the back of your skull, the lower portion of the back of your skull. And that bone back there is also called the occipital bone. So things are named for where they're located. So as you learn these terms, it's actually going to help you have a head start on learning all of the structures as we move forward. Optic, ophthalmic, or orbital deals with the eye. Palmar is the palm of the hand. Pelvis or pelvic is the lower portion of the trunk. Remember, trunk is thoracic, abdominal, and pelvic. Good. Plantar refers to the sole of the foot. For me, an easy way to remember this is if you've ever gardened before and you tamp down the ground with the bottom of your foot, you're pushing in the dirt, you're planting plants. That's the plantar portion of your foot. Popliteal refers to the knee area, and when we start looking at blood vessels, popliteal artery running right through the back of the knee. Pubic refers to the genital region. So it's not the whole pelvis, it's only the lower portion in the genital region. Tarsal, we already mentioned that. Carpals and tarsals mimic one another. So if carpals are wrist, tarsals are ankle. Temporal is going to be the side of the skull, and even the bone there is your temporal bone. Thoracic, you guys are familiar with that. I've said that probably 20 times already, right? Thoracic is going to be the chest area. And then umbilical, most of you guys are familiar with that term. That's going to be your belly button area. It just actually has an anatomical term, right? Whew. So that's a lot of information for just the first week. And that's not even everything that's located in your PowerPoint. I know for me, it helps if I can see things visually, hear them auditorily. So I wanted to give that to you. Each week, I'm going to do these mini tutorial videos that will hopefully complement what you're using for your PowerPoint and reading through in your textbook to help you be as successful as possible as students. I hope that this is helpful to you, and I will see you next week. Good luck studying.